Welcome to this short video that will go over some of the instructions for the problems associated with the second homework assignment, assignment 2B in Module 2. In this assignment, you should expect to spend around 6 hours doing a bit of a deeper dive into NumPy and array manipulation. Much of this assignment makes use of the following arrays. Some problems will involve creating new arrays as well. You should begin by importing NumPy as NP and then running this code cell to create the various constants and arrays used throughout much of this assignment. Right now I'm just waiting for it to connect. It is just doing that right now to the kernel. There we go. And now it's run those cells. So you should do it as well. You should find the following documentation quite useful. I've linked to it here, involving array manipulation routines for NumPy. This is the official documentation for the stable version. I definitely encourage you at various points when you're encountering new things and new methods inside of the homework notebook to take a look at the documentation here. And anything you click on, what's really wonderful about it, for instance, if you looked at let's say VStack, which is something we get to later in the homework notebook, you'll see information about what this is doing, and then you'll also see some examples that you can then make your own. Like you can take these examples, put them into the notebook, as well as making your own examples. Just don't necessarily mess with the problems I'm giving you. You just create your own cells. You can edit the code cells I'm giving you in terms of adding things, but you shouldn't really fundamentally change the problems I'm asking you to do. But by all means, create new code cells, document your own experimentation as you're working through the problems. So I just want to point out, you should always inspect the data just so you have an understanding of what you're working with. And so this is before we're even doing the problems, just kind of orienting yourself on what's going on in this assignment. Here you can just print what these shapes of these arrays are, and you'll see they're all different shapes. So you have a 1D array, that is array 1. Array 2 and 3 are both two-dimensional arrays, but they're different shapes. And arrays 4 and 5 are three-dimensional arrays, but they are also different shapes. And you'll see they're all shapes that involve sizes of components in the various dimensions of 3, 1, or 2. So they're not big objects. These are really small arrays. But they're going to allow us to explore a lot of different ideas in terms of messing with how we combine arrays and do arithmetic. In problem 1, we are going to look at how we can add arrays of different shapes. And this might seem a little weird because we've previously seen in the lecture notebook that component-wise arithmetic, like array addition or array multiplication, not the dot product multiplication, requires the shapes to be the same. This isn't necessarily the case. If the shapes are the same, then the results are really intuitive and obvious, but you can actually do addition and multiplication even when the shapes are slightly different, when they're not actually the same, at least under certain conditions. And I'm asking you to explore what those conditions are in terms of exploring these examples. So what I want you to do is try running each of the individual code cells and then answer the following two questions in the markdown cell below. So if you look at these various code cells, you'll see that I'm computing an array sum involving different combinations of the arrays in constants or arrays with arrays. Some of these will work, others of these will produce errors, and I described that they will produce various value errors. Now this is not certainly every different combination of the arrays and constants that I'm showing. It's just to get you started and an idea of what's working. You can then also do some exploration, do a Google search about broadcasting and when can you add arrays of different shapes together and what's going on. And then once you do that, and do this exploration, you can certainly do even more than what I'm showing here. You should then answer in this code cell what the conditions are for you to be able to add two arrays together. And so certainly one of them that we know is that they're of the same shape, or there's other conditions, and I want you to say what those are where you can do array addition. And then when the conditions are not met, that you'll get some sort of error, like a value error. And so I want you to again answer these two questions. Under what conditions can we add two arrays? And then you should also maybe talk about the type of error you get if those conditions are not met. And then what is the result of array addition under those conditions? Now, if they're the same shape, we know, we've explored this. It's this component-wise, it's very obvious. But when we add arrays that are different shapes, the result is going to seem a little different. It's going to require some more careful explanation than just, oh, the components are just added together. That's not going to be correct because they're different shapes. So I want you to really think about the answers to those two and answer them carefully. And so there's other instructions to read here in terms of just what's going on with these code cells, but I'll jump below to 1B. So 1B, I want you to read these instructions very carefully, and this part of the video is really important, I think, for answering this. So let's actually just take a pause real quick. You should just pause the video. You should read these instructions carefully, and then you should continue with the video. All right, I'm assuming that you've read the instructions for this problem carefully, and now you're here to see some description of what's going on in this code cell, or at least the various code cells associated with this. So I'm actually presenting our first user-defined function of the course. We are going to study these in more detail in Module 3, so that's the next module that we're going to start right after you finish this notebook. So this is a good time to actually see a user-defined function. It's not a very complicated object. I know there's all this different kind of color here and things seem weird. I just have these code comments that this is our first user-defined function. I'm defining the function array_sum. It takes in two inputs. I'm just calling them A and B, but when you input it, you can input all the different types of arrays, like array1, array2, array1, array3, and so on. And the idea of this function is that it's just going to attempt to sum the two arrays. If the arrays can be summed, I'll fix the typo there, then the sum is printed. And if the arrays cannot be summed due to a value error, then a description of the issue is printed. Now you'll notice what I'm doing, this is not a complicated function. I'm trying to print the sum. Now, if I can't print the sum because the shapes can't be broadcast together, something that was, you were discussing hopefully correctly in problem 1A when you solve it, this should give a value error. Now, instead of printing the results of that value error, I'm just printing this kind of useless message. Well, I mean, it's not entirely useless, but I'm making my message, which is this string variable that just says, can't sum those, and then I print that to the screen. So I do that, and you'll see if I can add arrays, so I haven't, I'll just go ahead and do this. So the array output will be printed, but I'll get to a sum like array2 and array3. I can't sum those, right? And if we go back, array2, right, is a 3x1 array, and array3 is a 2x3. And I just can't add them. Those shapes can't be broadcast together. But this is not a very useful message to print to the screen. So what I want you to do is to think about this value error and see the types of things, the types of information that's given in that value error here. And I want you to think about how you can use the shape information from the A and the B that are trying to be added in here. Code that up. Like code up something involving the shapes of those, cast them as strings and make a string message that you print. That's it. That's all I want you to do for this, is just make this message more informative. And I give some ideas about how much more information you can give. You can kind of follow what was in that value error, but you can also add additional information about what you found out about the conditions that are required for you to add to arrays, so that the user has more information than just this didn't work and here's the reason it didn't work, because these shapes are somehow not compatible or they can't be broadcast together. You could also tell them what's needed, or tell the user what's needed with this message in order to make sure that they perform an array sum to actually get a result that isn't an error. Now, I'm also exposing you to the concept of try and accept, that you can put this inside of any code. And one of the nice things is, unlike if you don't do this and you just run and you encounter an error, the code just stops. When errors occur, you'll just see the code ends. It just stops and says there's an error. And there's plenty of times where you could have a lot of code, or even in a function where you have some workflow where you want it to try various things and you're okay with proceeding with the rest of your code even if an error shows up. It might just be that you're working through different types of attempts at combining different pieces of data in different ways. And it's not that you want the whole code to stop. You just want to say, hey, if this happened, just let somebody know this is what happened. And it's almost treated more like a warning. The code keeps running even if you get this error. You'll notice, for instance, if I have like this print statement here, like I'll just put print hi there, and I run this, even though there was an error that occurred from trying to add array 2 and array 3, and I can show this to you here. I'll actually add a code cell right above this. Let me just, there we go, add a code cell. If I do array 2 plus array 3, this produces a value error. And the code is over at this point. Like, it stops when it sees this error. And if I put this high command here, like print high, I'll just fix that so it looks like the other one. Notice it didn't even ever run line 2. It stopped as soon as this error was received at line 1. Whereas that same error, it is occurring when I run this function, this array sum. Array 2 and array 3 are going into this function, and then the A is array 2, B is array 3. It's trying to add them, but it's creating this value error, and it's going to this exception, and then it's saying, well, you can't print those. And notice what happens. It still prints high, which means the code continued to run, even though that error occurred. I was just handling it with this try and accept, commands. So that's the advantage of using try and accept. You don't necessarily always want to do that. Sometimes when an error happens, you want the code to crash. You want it to stop executing, because things fundamentally depend later on in the code on the things you're trying to do. And so there's no way to proceed until these errors are fixed. But you can imagine if I just gave you like 2 arrays and you were just trying to study all the different ways that they could be combined. You might say, oh, try to add them, try to multiply them, try to do the dot product multiplication, try to concatenate them or tile them, or stack them in various ways. All the things we're going to see. And you don't necessarily want the code to stop running just because you got some value error. You're just trying to see, are these things even possible? You want to try it. And if they aren't, you just want to let the user know, hey, I can't perhaps do this thing, and here's maybe the reason why. But at least you wouldn't stop the code. It would just keep going and try the other things in your code, because they don't necessarily depend on this output. It was just something you were trying to do. So I'm just trying to expose you to that as a concept of trying to control workflow and handle errors when you don't want it to stop the operation of the code. So that's kind of the point of this part of the problem 1b. The other thing that you need to be very careful about, this is just a very subtle point, is when you're working inside of this, the only thing I'm asking you to edit again is this my message. And I would highly recommend breaking it up across lines. Remember that you could always, like, as you edit it, you could do this like plus equals to do the concatenation with another string. We cannot add the arrays because of, and you could then add something else. So like, I'm just showing you, like, you shouldn't do this because I'm just writing nonsense here, but you could put as a string like the shape of A, right? And this is not really the reason why. Like, there's more to it than this. So I ran that. You have to rerun this code cell, by the way, as soon as you make your change to my message. And as soon as you make that change and you run the code cell, it redefines the function with whatever changes you have in place. So now if I come back and I print this, and I'm just going to get rid of that and delete this code cell so that I clean up the screen a little bit. When I run this, now you'll see, right? It's saying, hey, can't sum those. We cannot add the arrays because of 3-1. Well, what does that mean? Because of 3-1? That doesn't make any sense. Well, I should add more information. I shouldn't even have this. This should just go away. Or so you make this maybe the initial part of my message, get rid of this entirely, so just delete it. And then you can say we cannot add the arrays because of the shape of the first array is, and you can give it 3-1, and the shape of the second array is, and you can just keep adding information to your message through string concatenation, and then print that message. You don't necessarily want the message also to be a very long line, so you might want to also make sure that you put in like line returns, like a new line, just to make the output printed nicely. I'm leaving this up to you. I'm giving you some ideas about how you can do this. Another point I want to emphasize here is you need to maintain, so I'm just pressing Control-Z on my keyboard. I'm not sure if it's going to come through in the, here, well, I'll just go ahead and delete this. I don't know if when I'm pounding my keys, if you're hearing that on the microphone. The other thing I want to emphasize is you need to maintain this indenting with your function. Like everything you're changing here should have this much indenting. And the great thing is, as soon as you start typing and working and you press enter, you'll notice that the indenting is maintained. If you don't maintain the indenting, you're going to get an error in the function when it tries to run this. So if I say, like, if I did this, if I was just off by 1, and so I'm just writing nonsense here. But if I wrote this, and notice, right, this is clearly not a line. The indenting is different between these two lines. So if I do that, I'm going to get an indentation error. Right, and you can see exactly, it's just like, it's not going on. It's saying, hey, at line 20, there's an indentation error. Your things need to align. in this function. So just make sure to maintain the alignment. We'll get into that more in module 3. Also, if I had one space too many, I mean, you'll see it's highlighting it in red. If I try to run that again, indentation error. It's an unexpected indent, right? So you don't want to have unexpected indents. You want this, right? Again, indentation error. This indent does not match the outer indent level. You just don't want that at all. You want it to be lined up. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So again, problem 1B, make this message better than just can't sum those. Make it have useful information about why you can't sum them, what the problem was, and the conditions under which you can do addition is something I also highly recommend adding into that, because I really want you to think about what we're able to do to combine arrays and add them and everything together. So there we go, I'm going to run that. So now this should all work, but of course I need you to improve this my message. You can totally delete this. You don't have to really worry about what this is. This is just a doc string, right? You know what code comments are. Doc strings are things that you usually put at the top of functions that give some information for a user about what is going on in that function. What's nice about it is I'll just show you about what's going on with like a doc string. If I was to type in like help array sum, it will print out that doc string that's at the top. So it gives you that information. So it's a good way to just provide functions with nice documentation that users can have access to when they forget what a function is supposed to do, but they remember the name. So, all right, that's kind of it for what I want to talk about in this part of the video involving problem 1B. I imagine this is the part that people are going to really pause and struggle with initially. So please start early, ask questions on Canvas. I am definitely here to help.